Get ready.
Hi, Kaz Riley here again, and this is Trancing in the Sheets, and I've got a very special and interesting guest today. But before I go over to her, just to remind you that you were sent a super sexy link that when you signed up for the excuse me, for the network, that's a $200 gift card, a travel card, so you can get some amazing discounts off hotels, car hire, and lots of other things. So don't forget to go and activate that link. And if you're interested on how travel vouchers could help your business, then just put the word solutions in the box below. It's easy. There's lots of destinations to choose from, and your clients will love you for it. So, Trancing in the Sheets with me today, I have Susan Wright from the National Coalition for Sexual Freedom. The coalition has been going since 1997, so 20 plus years. And they have been doing some amazing and outstanding work in the kink community, in helping all kinds of things. So they've got some really interesting programs that we're going to talk about today, in particular their consent program and also their kink aware professionals, of which I am one and have been for the past 4 years. So welcome to the show, Susan.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
So tell us a little bit about the National Coalition for Sexual Freedom.
N.C.S.F has been working to destigmatize kink and non-monogamy for 22 years. We really interface between the educational community, the educational groups, the businesses, the individuals that are in these very diverse communities. And we interface with the mainstream. So we try to destigmatize so that stop the discrimination that's happening against people, and we try to educate professionals about our community so they can better serve this underserved population.
Okay, so I know that kind of education has gone out to, it's all kinds of people. Some people like doctors, lawyers, just so that they can understand some of the things that they may seem and some of the dynamics, because one of the things that I certainly find the belief within the kind of vanilla world is that a lot that happens within the kink community is done non-consensually, isn't it? They don't often understand what consent is and how that looks like outside of what they believe to be a normal kind of vanilla relationship, isn't it? And actually it's often the opposite, where sometimes they're seeing vanilla things that are actually non-consensual but believe them to be, and vice versa in the kink world. So how do you go about helping professionals understand what they're seeing is good consent?
Well, we have our Consent Counts program, and Consent Counts is the educational program by which we have lots of different projects in there that we do education. So for example, we were just at the American Psychiatric Association. We had an exhibit booth, and one of the things that we were giving out was guidelines for mental health professionals on how to make non-monogamous clients comfortable, words to use, questions, even just having more than 2 chairs in your office if you're a marriage and family counselor. So we did this in conjunction with the APA's Division 44 Task Force on Consensual Non-Monogamy. We created this brochure, and we handed out hundreds of them. We also handed out hundreds of our Got Consent brochure for non-monogamy and Got Consent for kink. And I think that you're very right that these alternative sexuality communities are much more informed about consent and have been discussing consent and issues about how to make sure there's, no coercion going on, no manipulation, that when you're in a relationship that you can speak up and say what you want as your boundaries, teaching people how to enforce their boundaries, teaching people how to talk about sex in a responsible way. We're just not taught that. And if you can't talk about it, there's no way you can actually give informed consent to something that's happening. So we have a lot of information on that.
Absolutely. And actually, people hear me say this all the time, but those things, those kinds of lessons about consent and negotiation and how to learn and learning how to do all of those things, actually, I believe, should almost be taught in schools, because people don't know how to do that within vanilla relationships. As a therapist, one of the things that I see is I see people that are in very abusive relationships, and they don't even realize that they are. So I think there's a lot that, you know, just the whole knowledge of consent right across the board, just for life, actually is a very useful thing. It's not even just about sex, is it?
No, it's not. It's, I mean, really, you want to think about this, it's more about like interpersonal relationships, period. Because if you don't have consent as a basis of your relationship, then somebody's already taking advantage of somebody else. So one of the things we do with our consent counts programs are consent discussions. It's really consciousness raisings on consent. We sit in a big circle. It's very similar to what we did in the 70s with the feminist movement, where women just sat around and talked to each other about their experiences. So we find that if we do this and we have consent as the subject, and we kind of lead a discussion and evoke people's comments, and I mean, almost every time I do that, I have somebody who's saying, oh wow, I didn't realize that that was non-consensual. I did, you know, because it's the act of voicing it and saying, this person would not let me join a group where I could actually talk to other people. Well, that's a classic red flag sign of abuse. If somebody tries to control access that you have to other people, that has nothing to do with sex. That has everything to do with, are you living in a consensual relationship? Are you living in a relationship where you don't have to walk on eggshells and express your feelings and things of that sort? So I think that the mainstream has a lot to learn from what we know. I think that affirmative consent, as they are kind of trying to discuss it in colleges, like, may I touch you here? May I touch you here? That can be very coercive. That constant questioning, you can get somebody very excited and then get them to the point where you're questioning every step, and they're just like saying yes because they're very excited. They might not be in their right mind, you know. If they had been in cool, confident, you know, have a chance to like actually reflect, they might say no. So we really believe that people need to talk about their relationships ahead of time, talk about what they want to do sexually ahead of time. You know, go out to dinner and then talk about it over dessert. It's foreplay. It's very exciting to talk about what you want and what the other person wants. But because we have not ever been taught how to do this, it's very difficult for people to do. So when they come into the communities, they can get this education.
Absolutely. In fact, I think really we're almost discouraged from doing that, aren't we? You know, we're taught that, you know, especially women, you know, that we shouldn't ask for what we want. We shouldn't talk about what we want. We shouldn't voice what we want. And therefore, you know, it's very, you know, people find it very difficult. So classes like this and situations where they can go and do that openly and learn how to do it effectively, and also learn how to say no, so that, you know, they're not feeling that somehow they're letting somebody down, or that they're not performing a duty that they should be performing, whatever it may be. But, you know, that no simply means no, and they can say no to whatever they want to say no to. It's a really powerful thing, I think. I think it's, you know, it's something that, you know, we're not taught, aren't we? You know, we're taught how to say yes, almost.
Well, yeah, we're taught from kindergarten. Somebody asks you a question, you have to answer it. And we are not taught to draw boundaries around ourselves. There's a lot of people that the way that they're raised, they have no boundaries. So it's very difficult for them to start creating boundaries as an adult. So that's why it's very important to respect people's boundaries, I mean, at all stages of their lives. And sometimes part of this education is teaching people, you have the right to say no, you have the right to choose what you want to have happen to you. But so often we're taught that, like, well, if you're really in love with somebody, you just do what they want. That's not, that's a lot of time, that's not very healthy. You really need to have in your own mind, in your own heart, what it is that you want your relationship to look at. I love these communities because you can create whatever you envision. You can find somebody and work it out with them. You don't have to fit your relationship into a box that's monogamous or married, or you know, a certain kind of life that perhaps you feel like you've been kind of pushed into. You can't have the freedom to create it yourself, but to do that, you have to know what you want. You have to listen to what your partners want, and you have to be able to find areas of compromise and continue that conversation. I mean, consent is communication. It really can't be done without continuing talking, examining your own feelings, examining your partner's feelings. It's all very important, and keeping that dialogue open, that makes for a much more healthy relationship.
Absolutely, because of course consent can evolve and change, can't you? So what you might consent to one day might be not the same. You know, it may be that you consent to try something new and you don't like it, and therefore you don't consent to do it again. So it's about not just getting consent, but it's also about talking about stuff afterwards as well, isn't it? It's then kind of that checking in process, and you know, it's a whole long conversation. It's not just about the beforehand, it's about the afterwards and the next time as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. You want to be able to find out, what did you like? What did you not like? What would be better for you? Hey, I just read this in a book. What do you think about this? Oh, we saw this in a movie. What do you think about that? I mean, that's what creates the trust and that deep intimacy that people are really looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think wondering how they can find that, any couple would benefit for this kind of in-depth dive. But there's so many people I talk to, and they're afraid to talk to even their partner, the person they're supposed to be closest to, what their fantasies are, because they're afraid of rejection, because there is such stigma still against alternative forms of sexuality, even though it's not alternative. It's everybody's doing things like this. Everybody's, you know, there's like, I think there was a YouGov survey that found like 40% of people had experienced non-monogamy. I mean, that's a giant chunk of people. And for kink, there's a lot of people who include a little spanking in or a little role play in their sex life. They don't call it kink or BDSM. It's just their sex life, just how they're living their lives. But we need to make sure that this information about consent is out there so that we don't have people coming to us or coming to victim advocacy agencies saying, oh, well, he tells me I'm a slave and he's my master, so I have to do what he wants. It's like, that's not how this works.
No. And sadly, you know, there's so much on the internet now that's, you know, I always say the internet is the biggest source of misinformation as well as information. And certainly with regards to kink and BDSM, there's some great stuff out there, but there is a lot of misinformation. And I think a lot of the pornography out there as well that's BDSM or kink related kind of portrays that, doesn't it? This kind of master slave or mistress slave dynamic that it's not actually how it is. So it's obviously a not negotiated one. It's just, you know, it's a film, it's made up. Whereas, you know, in real life, when people are practicing this stuff, it's a very different thing. There's a lot of negotiation, or hopefully there is, and consent and an understanding about what that particular dynamic looks like, because it's, of course, it's different from person to person, couple to couple, you know, group to group, depending on what's going on, isn't it?
It is. But N.C.S.F has gathered, we took 2 years to create our consent statement that's listed under our consent counts program on our website. And it's quite a long document. And we took that time to find out what the community standards of consent were. So we talk about the legal, the ethical, you know, risk, the concept of risk. So anybody who's interested about this can go and take a look at our consent statement, and it really kind of outlines responsibilities that people have if they're doing like power exchange, as well as non-monogamy. And we also have brochures that outline this, like, you know, the helpful checklist of, you know, can you say no at any time? You know, have you worked this out in your relationship where you feel like you can voice your opinion? You know, certainly it's up to everybody to create their own dynamic, and some people go very deeply into a master-slave relationship. And as long as you are, you know, going into it with your eyes open, and this is something that you want, and you've worked it out with your partner, that's great. You can create any kind of agreement you want. But particularly in the beginning of a relationship, you want to make sure that it's based on a foundation of equality, where everybody is heard, everybody is respected. And so that's what we're aiming for by putting out these kind of educational materials. And another way we're doing that to help groups, we have a lot of educational group information for social groups and events, so that they can educate their members about consent, and they can deal with consent incidents in a way that you know, protects their members, helps them deal with their members. But one of the things that we have is our consent signs, and that's something that people can put on their social media. They can pick out, there's a wide variety of consent cultures, from, you know, implied before denied, which you see in like the Leatherman cultures, all the way to, you know, yes means yes. It's a very much an affirmative consent rather than no means no. So we have this wide variety of signs that people can put up on their social media, and or events can print out to put up on the walls to kind of help inform people, because how can people know what the culture of consent is unless they're told?
Absolutely. And you know, I use the a lot of the brochures that you have that are available off the website. You know, they're available. What's the website address?
It's ncsfreedom.org. So that's National Coalition Sexual Freedom.org.
Fantastic, because I know, I mean, I have some of those that I've used. I print them out and I use with some of my kink-friendly clients, which leads very nicely, because I'm one of your kink-friendly professionals, or your kink-aware professionals. I've been listed with you. The organisation Sexual Freedom Hypnosis is one of your coalition partners. But I'm only one of many, many partners, which is actually an international database of professionals, isn't it?
It is. We have over 2,000 professionals, and it is international. We have people in a lot of different countries, not just the U.S. And we're always looking to try to recruit more professionals onto this database, because people in these communities, they need to access somebody that's not going to make them feel bad about who they are. If you're going to see a therapist and about depression, you don't want the therapist to then start telling you, well, you need to stop doing this, and maybe you'll feel better, because that's not the point. So this Kink-aware professionals has been going on for many decades. It's something that was given to N.C.S.F. To take over and manage and grow. And that's one reason we go to a lot of these professional conferences, to try to recruit more professionals to list themselves. It's super important that we have this resource, and it's therapists, it's attorneys, it's accountants, it's a wide variety of different kinds of people.
I know when I looked at the list of the people that were on there, I mean, it really does cover everything. You know, there's doctors on there, and everything really, from your plumber and electrician even, isn't there? I guess right the way through to doctors and attorneys, which I think immediately one of the things is, as a kink-aware professional, a kink-aware or a kink-friendly hypnotherapist, one of the things that I often see is where people have been to see other therapists, and their kink has been called into question, where it's completely irrelevant to why they're in therapy in the first place. But the assumption is made, because it's a different lifestyle, or it's a different way of doing things, or a different way of identifying sexually, or just things that people like, that there must be somehow needs fixing. And actually it doesn't, does it? It just needs an understanding of and an acceptance of by whomever that person is working with.
Absolutely. And you can get this education. Professionals have the access to it at professional conferences. We try to make sure there's workshops on things like this. They can come to the N.C.S.F website and get that education. It's not like they have to know everything in order to be listed. You just have to be accepting, and not use it against a client. It's very important. Stigma causes people problems. Stigma and shame are probably one of the biggest issues that we have. And that's one reason why N.C.S.F's fighting that so much. We actually worked with the American Psychiatric Association to change their diagnostic manual, because there was discrimination happening. Attorneys were opening up the DSM and were saying, oh, if you have a paraphilia, you might have another paraphilia. And then they were taking child custody away from people. So we worked with them to make sure that they made it clear. And they did, and that people in community networks, like these, educational communities we're talking about, are mentally healthy as a group. And since they changed that, the discrimination plummeted. So, it was like 124 parents came to us for help in 2008, and then 2 years ago it was 15 parents.
That's fantastic, isn't it?
And it just shows what institutionalized discrimination can do, the harm that it can do to people.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I mean, the evidence, just to kind of put this out there, the evidence about, in terms of stability, mental stability, self-esteem, actually shows that people that are within the kink community tend to have a much higher kind of stability and self-confidence and all those kinds of things. And actually, compared to the vanilla world, it's actually the opposite of the assumption that was made for many years, isn't it?
It is. I mean, that was a big problem for us, as we were seen as mentally ill, sick or crazy. And, it's hard to fight for your rights when that perception is out there. So that project that we did was extremely influential. We had the help, thank goodness, of a number of professionals who also agreed. We put out a petition and we got tons of professionals to sign on that in support of this. And I think that they just saw, if all of these therapists are saying that this is an issue, this is something we need to address. And that's the beauty of what N.C.S.F does. Because we're such a grassroots organization, we're really responsive to what the issues are that are happening among people, and we hear about it. People come to us for other programs that I'm sure we'll talk about at some point, and so we hear what's needed, and that's what we focus our advocacy efforts on.
Absolutely. So we're running out of time for this particular interview, but I'm hoping that as we move through the seasons of Trancing in the Sheets, that you'll come and tell us more and more about this, because I think it's something that really needs to get out to a much wider audience, so people that can understand. Because one of the things that I'm trying to do in terms of hypnosis is get people to understand, or help people to understand, the varieties of sexual flavors and tastes that are out there that are actually all do actually come under this umbrella of normal, because there's no such thing as normal as long as everybody's consenting and everybody's happy within those kinds of relationships. So I think if you'll come back on, we would love to have you, and we can talk about all of those kinds of things. But in the meantime, if you can just tell us again where people can find the information that they need from the National Coalition for Sexual Freedom.
Our website is ncsfreedom.org. And we've been talking about the Consent Counts program and the Kink Aware Professionals.
Sorry, go on.
They both have a lot of information on our website.
There is your website is absolutely astounding. There's some great stuff on there, and about a lot of other kink-related things and sexual freedom-related things there as well. It's not just those two things. There's lots of other things on there as well, isn't there?
Yes, there is. We have our incident reporting and response. That's direct services. We have our media outreach program. We have our education outreach program, so we got plenty we can talk about.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Susan, for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure having you.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
And if you're enjoying Trancing in the Sheets and these really quite fascinating and mind-opening conversations that we've been having, there are another 7 hosts on the Hypnosis 24/7 Live network. One of which is the world's fastest hypnotist, the master of rapid inductions, Sean Michael Andrews. So don't forget to tune into his show and the other shows, because we've got all kinds of interesting and amazing mind-opening topics. So I'll see you next time on Trancing in the Sheets. Thanks for joining us.
Get ready.